live on Facebook. It is the B2B Community Builder Show, Season 5, Episode 182, 183. I am your Chief Executive Connector here as your host, and I am super, super pumped for our guest today. For one, because I don't meet more alpha marketing animals and more alpha networking animals than myself very often. But I'm going to go ahead and be beta today to Elizabeth Pamplone, who is the boss over there at Absolute Marketing. She is a marketing minimalist, AKA
Yes.
She knows how to make a name for herself. She knows how to, draw attention. She's an award-winning international speaker. She's a podcaster, one of the most put together human beings that you will ever encounter as far as just like skill set, communications, professionalism, very, very impressive person. And on top of that, she pulled off a magnificent feat, which is she appeared on 200 podcasts in 1 year. And we're here to talk about that. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I feel honored that I get to have you here on the stage and get to have you here. So I like to dig right into it to start, right? Like you appeared on 200 podcasts in 1 year. Why would anybody want to do that?
Oh my gosh. Well, when there was a pandy going on, I had to figure out how to network when I couldn't network. I was actually networking 3 times a day for a year. Then I ran 13 networking groups a month for a year, almost 2 years. And then I went down to like 2 to 3 times a week networking. And then 2020 happened. So then I had literally went from all of that hype and all of that networking to nothing, to zero. So people say going from 0 to 60, I went from 60 to 0. And
Wow.
so I had to really figure out, how am I going to do this? And how am I going to still keep up the connections that run my business without being able to go out? So I thought, well, what can I do that's one-to-one networking? Well, that means I'm talking to one person at a time. And there were other networking groups going on online at the time, but I thought it just didn't feel like an authentic way for me to connect and communicate. So I thought, well, podcasting is one-to-one because you're talking to a host, right? Then I thought, wait a minute, it's also one-to-many because you're talking to their whole audience too. So I was really, really excited about that and like the prospect of it. And at the time, there were so many podcasts coming on board that were just new, and people were trying to do something different with their time because they had all this time now, and they were hungry for guests. And so I was very happy to kind of be in that sweet spot for that time period.
I mean, that's one heck of a pivot. I'm super impressed with it. I want to get into it. I just want to tell our community that is here right now that for whatever reason, Zoom hates me and the chat is disabled. So use the Q&A function, chat as you normally will. Because the chat was disabled, I missed on the roll call. We do a roll call, Elizabeth. I'd like to welcome folks. So I'm just going to call you out when you're here. Normally I wait for you to check in, but Brett Lanier, I don't know you. I want to get to know you. Welcome to the show. David Carmel, same thing. Gareth Beverly, my British buddy from high school. Isar Matis, my partner. Jesse Rittenhouse, who we introduced, right? A buddy from Miami who's a green building consultant. Lori Goldman, a wonderful member of our community as well. Mike Hines, an awesome business coach. Pratiti, another great business coach in the house. Use the Q&A freely. If y'all want to come up and ask questions, raise your hands or put them in the Q&A as well. So the pandy hits. I like how you said that. Pandy. You were used to having networking as a marketing channel for you.
Yep.
And that channel goes away and you decide, I love the language of like, man, I used to go one-to-one. Why not go one-to-many? Right? Like, I think that's really, really smart. Did you kind of like go to the board and evaluate different options of how to go one-to-many, right? Like, did you think, were you thinking of other things like, how do I do like a paid ad strategy? How do I go like live? Were you evaluating other things, or did your mind immediately go to this podcasting?
It immediately went to podcasting because I'd actually done podcasting back in 2014. I had done my own shows. I had done all the editing. I had been doing interview podcasting, and I'd even done things with a local podcast here in town called Deemable Tech, which I don't think is running anymore. And I had gone down to the radio station where they recorded it, and so I had done other things in that realm. But what I realized when I was thinking, how do I replace networking? I knew I had to replace the one-to-one networking, connections and the one-to-many at the same time. Because when you go to an event, you do talk to an individual person, but you also get to stand up in front of everyone and give your little 30 seconds, right? So I'm seeing networking as this kind of 2-for-1 deal. And what else can I do that's not going to take up the same amount of time, I guess, an hour to go to a networking event or whatnot, that will give me the same 2-for-1 deal. And podcasting really just filled that slot. And so I really didn't have to go any further. I didn't have to look for anything else. That was the only thing I needed at that time.
I love it, Elizabeth. Like I feel very at home with you as a relationship strategist, right? Like I don't know many people that think like that, right? This is at the core of everything we do, right? Like this idea that, you know, having this live show allows me to build a one-to-one relationship, and then making it a podcast is one to many, but we also add this like live component. So I can also build the one to few relationships with Brett and Gareth and Jesse and Lori, like in Petiti, like that is exactly how we think here. So I don't think I've ever heard anybody think like that as well. And it makes me feel very, very comfortable in your presence, and like we're kindred spirits. So I mean, let's get into how you pulled it off, right? Like I'm a podcaster. I get reached out to by all sorts of like podcasting agency broskies trying to get their people on the show, or somebody that's out there trying to do their own press tour. Usually I'm just like, no, thanks. Cause I don't even know you, man. And you're not coming up with any kind of value. So talk to me about when you went to go for it. Did you start one way and it evolved, or did you like kind of like plan this like campaign effort and go? Tell me a little bit about how you got started.
It was very organic. And I will kind of say, just going back really quick to the relationship building side of it, I use a tenet of minimalism. And it seems like you're doing that as well, because a tenet is one in, one out, right? And so in this case, I had one out, which was networking. It was gone. And so when I brought one in, it had to exactly replace what I was already doing. So there was no, I have to do 10 other things also. It was just one out, one in kind of idea. So that kind of goes to the minimalist idea that you don't have
I
to
need
do
more
extra.
minimalism in my life, just for the record. We'll talk about that on another show.
Um, that's a whole other show.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the way that I actually went about it was, I just started looking up being a guest on podcasts. How do I be a guest? How do I pitch? And I literally wrote one pitch. That was it. I had one pitch, and the different shows that I would apply to were all marketing shows, except occasionally, because I got tired of talking about marketing, but I have done some things in my personal life. Like I went through a divorce. I was a ballroom dancer, with like competitive ballroom dancer. I love old movies, and I also love like historical genealogy type things. And so I would apply to podcasts that would just talk about those things as well. So I would have my one marketing pitch that was the same for every single show. And then I would have these little snippets that I would add to my pitch that would talk to my experience going through divorce and starting my business, or my experience as an old soul watching old movies when I grew up, or my experience as a ballroom dancer. And so those things actually got me onto more shows, because I wasn't just thinking inside my box of marketing. I was thinking outside my box. And one of the shows I got on was actually a marketer who did a show where we watched an old movie and we talked about it while we were watching it. Of course, the audio was not in the podcast, but we're literally watching it online together while he's recording us talking. And we talked about everything from business to family to what was going on in the movie. Another one I was on was about ballroom dancing and about ballroom dancing companies in small towns. And then she started asking me not only about my experience as a ballroom dancer, but also my experience as, a marketer, and how could these small ballroom companies during a pandemic get their word out. And I gave some ideas for that. So it was very much not hiding my identity as a marketer with these other kind of genres, but also where could I slip it in the conversation and kind of make it about marketing at the same time.
Love it. Love it. Love the approach of you can always start with a wide net and then funnel it into kind of the conversation that you want to have, right? Gareth is putting in the Q&A that he will watch a Star Wars film with anyone, anytime, open offer. Good to know, Gareth. Man, that's really, really smart. So, okay. So you had your one pitch for marketing. You
Mhm.
had your also stuff that makes me interesting.
Right. Little snippets I would copy and paste in.
Little snippets that you copy and paste in. How was the response initially with the one pitch?
Overwhelming.
Really?
It was overwhelming. And the reason it was overwhelming was because it was also something they could read as the intro.
Mm.
It told you everything you needed to know in 3 sentences. And it had a little parentheses in it. And I think this is one of the things that I saw the most come back as feedback from the pitch itself. When I would actually talk to someone, whether it was the introduction of the show where we would just like talk for a few minutes before we started recording, or whether it was a pre-interview before they would actually interview me, the feedback was always, your pitch intrigued me because of what was in the parentheses. And it was simply this: Elizabeth Pamplone, parentheses, your best guest ever, parentheses, marketing minimalist, et cetera, et cetera. And it had my pitch. It has the intro that I sent you when I applied to be on this show.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So I'm hearing a couple of things that skill networks do well. Skill networkers do well, right? Making it easy, right? Like you are reducing friction from the podcaster's mind by number one, presenting yourself in line with the topic du jour, right? Obviously, like the integration with the topic, then knowing that they need to come up with some kind of intro and they need to know some kind of interesting way to present you. You're doing that work for them. And then also kind of doing the thing that makes you also stand out, which is parentheses, your best guest ever. They probably don't get that very often. It makes them go, oh, okay, that's
Yeah.
a little something here. What was your subject line? Like, what's the subject line of the email?
So a lot of the times I didn't email. I would go so my strategy was a little different. I would go to these online lists and they would say, here's the 20 people looking for guests. And then I would look at their requirements. And if I met their requirements, I would apply. And usually you would apply through the system. So there wasn't like a subject line you were pushing through. Another thing I would do is I would join Facebook groups that had to do with guesting on podcasts. Someone would post something. I would say, hey, I'd love to be on your show in the comment. Then I'd post a link to my press kit and they could check me out for themselves. But the press kit had everything they would need if I was to be on the show: the headshots, the logo link, the website link, the freebie link, my bio, how to say my name phonetically. Like everything was there for them. A list of topics I would cover, questions they could ask me that they could download and print. Like it was all on the press kit. So I wasn't ever really emailing directly. The only time I emailed directly was when I found this guy. He was a marketer. He had been on probably like 80 podcasts and he was really good. And he was on really good podcasts. Like the host that he was on as a guest, they just were so good. They were so polished. And I was like, these are the kinds of shows I want to get on. And so I literally went on his website. I wrote down every single podcast he was on. I went to those individual websites for those individual podcasts. I either went to their apply link and applied through there, or I went to their contact form, which usually doesn't have a subject, and I would put my pitch in there and say, I'd love to be on your show. Here's a little about me. Here's a link to my press kit. Let me know. So I used a couple different strategies to actually find the shows and then apply.
Okay. So list of strategies. First, you were using the podcast broker kind of services, right? Like those.
The
There
list, yeah.
a bunch of those popped up during the pandemic. So that was definitely
Yeah.
an opportunity, a time and place, right? You used
Mhm.
Facebook groups. And then you also said you found some dude that made awesome podcasts and you followed kind of like his wake. How did
Yeah.
you, was that somebody that you followed already? Or how did you figure out that this person was really great on podcasts and that you would be great on the podcast that he was on?
So I was on a show that I really, really liked and that the host was amazing and his production was amazing. So I started listening to other shows that he had done. And I found someone who was on the show way prior to me, maybe a year ahead of me. And I really liked his presentation method and how he spoke and his stories. And so then I started following his like press side of his website. And when I saw all the other shows he had been on, knowing that we had been on the same, series, we'd been in the same show before, knowing that I could reach that caliber because we were kind of peers at that point, I could say to the people when I was pitching, I would sometimes add something like, I saw that you had so and so on your show. We were both on such and such show. Here's a link, to kind of give that credibility that, hey, you already know this guy, even though he doesn't know me, but I can relate to him and I can kind of connect up with him and use his coattails a little bit to say, oh, we were on the same show over here. That's really high quality. You should totally check this out.
That is a brilliant strategy, right? Like that part was kind of one of the things that you told me about in our onboarding call that you started kind of doing. So that was this an iterative process, right? So it sounds like first was the press kit, and the list and the Facebook groups and the services. Now you found this dude. Did you then go apply this across multiple kind of like channels of multiple different people, or how did that evolve?
His was the only one that I did that with. And just to be honest, there's a lot of people on marketing podcasts that are real bad, like just horrible. Like they just aren't good at presenting. And so it was very difficult for me to find. And so I really was really picky about who I would utilize as a, kind of put someone on a pedestal and go, hey, this person was on your show and now I want to be on your show because I'm as good as them. So I was really picky about that. His was the only one I really did that with. And it was because he was on a trail of shows, like kind of like you said, press tour. He was on a tour of shows that I had already seen, I'd already heard of. They were kind of on my bucket list of shows to be on. And so I just had to kind of level up until I got there. And once we both hit the same show, even though it was a year apart, then I knew I could use his trail of wherever else he'd been and kind of use that to my advantage.
All right. We're going to call this the podcast tour wake strategy, right? Like this is so freaking smart. You mentioned a couple of things, right? A, if you find somebody that has been on the shows that you want to be on, how can you level up till you get to maybe the lowest rung on the ladder of shows that person has been on, and then parlay that up the chain? That's very similar to what people do in the blogosphere of like, if I can get published on some stupid blog and then I can send it to some stupid business journal that I can then send it to some stupid magazine that I can then send to the Wall Street Journal, right? Like there is precedence for this in the marketing world. I've never heard anybody utilize that in this strategy. And I think that's absolutely freaking brilliant. How did you come up with that?
It just happened.
You're just so smart. You're just so smart.
It
You're a
wasn't like
relationship
I sat down and was
strategist.
like, I should come up with something amazing.
God, man, yes, relationship strategy. I love this. What else?
It
Is there
seems
anything?
natural to do. Like
Yeah,
it seems like,
No,
well,
I get
that's
it.
just the next thing you do, right?
I get it. You're like asking like the Hall of Fame pitcher, how do you throw 100 miles an hour? He's like, I don't know, just pick it up and throw it. Are there any other genius strategies like this that you use before we move into other parts of this?
That was the major one, but writing one pitch and being really assured that that was the pitch I wanted to use. Because in the beginning, when I first started applying, I applied for at the peak, I was applying to about 30 or 40 a day. So, there was a ton of applications I was doing. And in the beginning, the first 100 or so out of the 400 or whatever that got me on the 200, it was so difficult because I was writing each one as I came across a pitch, as I came across a show. And so I was writing a lot of the same things over, but they were like, people were telling me, you have to have a different pitch for each one. And if you don't, it's not authentic and da da da. But what I realized was I'm going to say the same thing every time. And whether you read these 3 sentences and you like me or you don't, that doesn't matter. Like you're going to like me or you're not, whether I write you 10 sentences that are custom. So sometimes I would add a sentence if I felt like it was necessary to like, hey, this guy was on your show and I want to be on the show too, kind of thing. But then there was the same pitch over and over. So being really, I guess solid and like have faith in that one pitch knowing that it was my best work, knowing that if I didn't get on a show because of that pitch, then they weren't probably going to like me anyway. So knowing that that was okay in my mind, that was really a relief that I didn't have to worry about those other things.
I feel like that ties in nicely with your minimalism principles as well, right? Like having the one pitch, not having like the decision making fatigue of all these different things, melt that away and just be cool with like the acceptance of, whether this thing works or not is your best shot anyways, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Jesse's got a great question here. Jesse Rittenhouse, green building consultant extraordinaire, asks, does LinkedIn help to get you booked? Would you recommend announcing as part of your LinkedIn profile description your pitch and that you are available for podcasts? Would you include your press kit as a downloadable file on LinkedIn? Anything there?
Yeah. So my press kit is actually not downloadable. It is an entire web page. It is getabsolutemarketing.com/press kit. If you want to look at it, it's very simple. And I did it as a web page because I made it easier for myself to edit, because I'm constantly adding things, changing things, removing stuff. My freebie is constantly changing. I've updated my headshots, all that kind of stuff. So I have it as a web page, and I don't have a downloadable version because downloadable versions of press kits are for people who want to be speakers. They print it and then they take it to their boss, and then they say, hey, we want this person as a speaker, et cetera, et cetera. It has to go up a chain. When you're working with podcasters, it's not going anywhere. They want to see it, click it, move to the next thing. They don't want to have to get an email, download an item, open that item, PDF, too small, can't read it, squish, squish, right? Like the whole thing. They want to just read, copy, paste, all that stuff. And on a downloadable file, sometimes you can't do that. So I made it a web page specifically in my website.
Everybody's freaking out about that web link again. Can we say it? Getabsolutemarketing.com/what?
Getabsolutemarketing.com/press kit. It's all one word.
Putting it in there. Okay.
Yeah. So on LinkedIn, I have put that I got on podcasts. Like I say, I'm an international speaker, I'm a podcaster. Here's a link to my press on my website, not the press kit, but the shows I've been on so that you could see. So I have people that have contacted me through LinkedIn to be on their show. That's more rare because it's kind of you have to happen upon me in order to see that.
So a couple of cross-contextual examples here that people are talking about in the Q&A. So first of all, quick timeout. We're having this problem with the chat. What I'm going to ask Roanne to do, Roanne, I've made you a co-host. If I can ask you all, we're going to make you all panelists because panelists are able to chat, and that way we're going to solve that. I'm just going to ask everybody to put themselves on mute as they come up. We're going to be able to see everybody's face. It's going to be awesome, and just be cool about it. Let's not have chaos yet until we get to relationship-driven growth strategy sessions, which will happen in about 35 minutes. We're going to open it up and we're all just going to like share advice with everybody. So Ryan, why don't you start letting people up as panelists, and that way folks can use the chat and we can even maybe get some interaction going, which I think will be fun. All right. So Lori and Jesse have both hit on a similar nerve, right? This idea that this strategy seems to be pretty usable universally for different things. Lori said, this could easily be applied to a job search. Jesse's asking, have you ever tried to use the same approach to speak at conferences, maybe even to get a paid speaker engagement? If not, would you recommend it?
I have actually. And I feel like the speaker world is a lot more closed than the podcasting world. And that's just been my experience, just because my subject is so broad that I do have an issue with people saying, oh, you're in marketing, we have 1 billion of those people around, so that I have had a little more trouble with, but it's starting to pick up for me. So I'm starting to parlay it more. But I definitely found that the podcasting community was more receptive. And one of the things that I do want to say about the podcasting community is that I did not discriminate if your show only had 1 or 2 episodes. That was not a factor for me. I didn't care how many episodes you had because there were so many people starting shows that were amazing people. So I just said, whatever you got, if it's your first episode, I'll be your first guest. Sounds great. Because I didn't want to limit myself, just as in networking. If you go out to a group and you're like, these aren't really my people, I don't know if they've got the money for what I do, right? You kind of can tell, you're like giving it the judge a book by its cover. And then someone comes up and says, well, I run a $500,000 business, or I want a $3 million business. And you're like, what? So, and then they want to work with you. So it's kind of that judge a book by its cover thing. So with the podcasting, I just left it wide open. And one of the people that I actually worked with on their podcast, they had 3 episodes in. I think I was number 3 or 4. And I ended up making over $20,000 just from that episode. So I tried to just say, no judgment here, whatever you got, I'll be on it. However new your show is, I'll be on it. Some of the episodes never aired because they never got that far. But then there were people who had thousands of episodes and they also seemed a little less engaged. So I got a kind of a mix from that, but I just tried to realize that it was going to be not judging a book by its cover, if that makes sense.
Man, I love this. This is so good. So a couple of things that rings true to me there is, number one, if we're talking about the value of not being too picky about the podcast that you're on, right? One, it's iteration of your message, right? My buddy Jerry McNamara tells me all the time, right? Like, he went on, it's Alex Sanfilippo's service. I forgot which one this is.
Yeah,
Podmatch. Yeah. He's like, he went on and just like talked on like 6 different podcasts with no audience, that the guy didn't know what he was doing, but it was great for him to just like iterate messaging. And 2 is the idea that podcasts with the smallest audiences usually are very engaged audiences, right? Because it's like their mom and their best friend and the people that know them from work. So like it's a high like level of like engagement. So it would make perfect sense that a podcast with a small audience, if you hit the right note, can be high ROI for you, like you just described. And last but not least, I'm just going to flatter myself by giving this advice, but being one of people's first podcast episodes is good, because very common podcasting behavior is, if you hear a show and you like it, most people go back to episode 1 and then listen to like the first couple of episodes to kind of catch up. So that inherently has some really, really good value. So that's really cool. And on that note, speaking of nailing your messaging, I know you got some advice there, because I know that you're a great speaker, right? So like, how did you prepare to really nail your messaging? Can you give some advice there?
So I was not prepared for that. When I first started, if you go back and you listen to, like the first few episodes that I ever did, don't do that. Don't. They were too much, right? I wanted to give all the things for all the reasons and have all the info out there. And then there were some where I pulled way back because I was like, oh, I gave too much info last time. And my message was almost nothing because I pulled too far back. So going through all that, I would say probably about 40, around between 30 to 50 in, somewhere in there, I started to hit a stride where I knew what questions were going to be asked. I knew what people were thinking. I knew what the pulse was, but it did take me that many to go through to realize, what are the questions people are asking? Because I could talk about social media all day. I could talk about websites all day, but it doesn't matter if it's not the questions that people actually have and it's not answering those questions. So once I got a few in, and, then people started asking me for like the questions to ask me. They wanted me to give them questions to ask me. And I was like, no, I need you to ask me the questions, But yeah, I just think that the messaging part took me some time to find my way. But once I did, the rest of the 150 were just like sleepwalking for me. I mean, it was literally just, I could do it in my sleep. One time one of the people didn't do a video. And so it was just audio. So I literally sat in my office. I had a migraine and I just talked, and I just, it was just like, I'm just going to do it because I have to. And I already signed up for this. But so it was just one of those things. It was such an autopilot thing and those episodes were some of my best ones. And even the episodes that I thought were horrible, like this one guy, I don't know what was happening that day, but it was off. We were both off. And I thought he was mad at me the whole time. It's just the way he was asking the questions. He just seemed really like put off by everything I said. And I was getting a little defensive because I was like, well, this is the way it is, And so then I listened back to that episode and we sounded amazing. I don't know. I guess just in my head, that's the way it sounded. So my other lesson was, from that was that I needed to listen back to my episodes, because even if I thought it went poorly or I thought I didn't get the message across that I wanted to, especially in the beginning, I would listen to the episodes as they aired, because I would hear not only the things that went wrong where I could fix, right? I could say, oh yeah, don't say that again, or don't use that example again. But then I could also hear the brilliant pieces that came out of it and go, girl, you fine, girl. That's great. Like, like that's awesome. So, and kind of give myself a little pat on the back, because when you're doing that many and you're kind of putting that out as a labor of love, you don't get paid for this part of it. It was very discouraging sometimes when I wouldn't hear anything or there wouldn't be any traction from it. But that really wasn't why I was doing it in the end. But at the same time, it can be, 30, 40, 50, 60 in. You're like, all right, is this going to work? Is this going to be a thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Reps, man. Right. Like the value of getting reps in and being able to like iterate and get better and then put it on autopilot. And another thing that you are referencing is this idea of there's so much value in going back and re-listening. Like I used to never do it, right? Like I used to be like, nah, I'm not, it's kind of douchey to like listen to myself. I feel like the music, there was some movie I saw once that was like made fun of like a musician that would play their own music in the car when they're driving around with their friends. So I was like, I felt that way. And then I started thinking about it differently. I started thinking about it like great athletes watch game tape, right?
Mhm.
They go back and they look at their mistakes and they look at what they did well. And I have found so much value. And I heard Christopher Lockett talking about how he re-listens to all of his podcasts. And if you don't like your own podcast, then go punch yourself in the face and stop making a podcast. Right. Like I started taking that to heart. And I think that there's a ton of value in that advice of, like going back and checking it out. And speaking of great athletes, I want to listen to this like famous Elizabeth Pamplone migraine episode, like it's like the Jordan flu game or something like that, right? Like I definitely want to. What do you remember what podcast that was on or
Oh
not?
gosh, no. I couldn't even tell you. I
All right, well I'll
couldn't
just have
even
to
think
listen to
of
like
it.
700
You'll have to
podcasts
listen
to
to
get
all
through
200 and tell me which one you think it
it.
was.
Yeah, like it's only been 200, like that number stopped, right? Sure, buddy. That's really cool. That's really awesome. In the reps, right? So like in the reps and in re-listening to yourself, what kind of things have you learned to tweak to get better, right? Like what in your head and all this repetition makes a good speaking point or makes a good preparation for a podcast?
Definitely the tease. The tease is the best.
Give us an
I in the
example. What's the tease? What's the
So
tease?
in the beginning, I would talk about websites, or social media, for example. I'll use social media. It's a better example. So I talk about social media and I would say we create 1 year in a day. We create 365 posts in a day. Like I'd be explaining this whole process. And then I would say it's really easy. You can do it too. And people would say, oh my gosh, I couldn't even think of that. The host would just be incredibly like, oh my gosh. And they would say, well, how do you do that? Right? How's that even possible? So I would lay out literally the whole day in like 10 minutes. And I would just give like a rundown of everything we would do. And the host was just like, okay, that's okay. That sounds great. Like, first of all, they were thinking it's impossible. I could never do that. I don't know what you're talking about. And then they would say, okay, well, what system do you use to schedule all these posts? And I would tell them exactly where I would just like, transparency. Here's the system I use, blah, blah, blah. And I cut myself out of the process. I totally cut myself out. And I would literally give them every little thing. So then when I was tweaking that process and saying, okay, what can I take out without taking out the message? And what can I give without giving it all away? And so now it goes a little something like, if someone says, oh my gosh, well, how do you do that? 365 posts in a day. How would you even create that? I say, well, one of the best types of posts you can create, which is going to give you a lot of content really fast, so I'm giving you an instant win, right, is to go to your FAQ page. Go to your FAQ page, take all your FAQs and make them posts. How many posts have you created? 10, 20? How many all at once? Like it's just done. But it's not my whole process, right? I'm not giving you the whole process. I'm giving you a very, really, really good, really good thing that you can do right now. But then, and they say, well, what program do you use? Like, how do you get all these posts all done in one day and scheduled? Well, I actually have a pro toolkit. You can go to getabsolutemarketing.com/free. You could download the pro toolkit. And it has everything that I use in my business, no holds barred, super transparent, and tons of discounts. So I'm not giving you the name of it so that you can go look it up and cut me out of the process, but then I could get affiliate marketing through it, or I can get the company to notice how many people I'm sending through to them so that we can do projects later. So I'm utilizing my same exact tools, but in a different way.
Are you giving tips on like how to monetize a podcast right now or how to create good podcast speaking points? Is kind of where I'm like, where my
Both.
head goes. It's
It's
both,
both.
right?
You have to have both. You have to do both at the same time. It's kind of like I used to follow this guy named Mark Vickers, and he did this thing called speaking is selling. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is totally me. I could talk all day long and I could sell all day long. So I went to some of his seminars, and this was his point. He's like, if you're speaking, you're selling, right? You know how those people, like, they have the bad boyfriend or the bad girlfriend, they're like, oh my gosh, their mouth is moving, they're lying, right? Well, if my mouth is moving, I'm probably selling you something. And you might not even know it. And it's about giving value, but then taking something and receiving it as well. So not only am I saying, hey, go get your FAQs, make them all posts. Now you've just done 20 posts or 10 posts really, really fast. That's how the day will go, or that's how our process works. And then saying, hey, this is a system that I use. I really like all these programs, but I'm not just going to give them all to you one by one. You'd be writing down them forever. I just compiled them in a list. And if I change one, you get notified. It's changes in the list. So it's constantly up to date. So I'm giving you something else as well, but I'm also receiving your email address and kind of your trust that I'm going to not spam you, but at the same time, I'm giving you something, but I'm also receiving too.
I feel like I have Russell Brunson on my podcast right now. Right. Like I like when I'm listening to Russell Brunson speak, like I'm like, this dude is selling me right now. I know because I've studied everything he's doing and I know everything he's doing and he's always selling me, but I'm learning so much. I can't stop listening to this freaking guy.
Right.
Man, that's really smart. Right. So speaking of Russell Brunson, one of the things that you've been saying this whole time, apart, like the T's and how to lay out that kind of like, what's he called it? He calls it the yellow brick road, right? Like you're like laying out a yellow brick road for people to come to your Oz or whatever you want to call it. But within it all is that you have a mastery of hook points, right? Like I can tell that you were like a hook point factory. You're like, oh, 365 posts in one day, 200 podcasts in a year. Like you have this, right? When did you learn the value? Explain to me what I'm saying right now. Cause I'm just saying hook points because I get it, but like, somebody that our friend that's listening right now, like
goes back
what is
to
that
marketing about? Minimalism. It goes back to minimalism. It goes back actually, to be honest, and this is something I've never shared on a podcast before. So Pablo exclusive.
Teaser.
All right.
Prepare to be sold.
Nancy Drew Reporter. Nancy Drew Reporter is a 1942 film. And it's a Nancy Drew film is kind of based on the books, a teen bop movie of the day. And she was writing an article. She was this reporter. She had to like go and find the story. She had to get the scoop, right? She had to write the headline. And the whole thing was writing the headline, telling the story, and getting them to come back for more. And so that's kind of what I've always done with marketing is tell me something amazing, but in a very short way, then explain it to me, and then get me to come back for more. And so, that's kind of the process I use for everything. And if I'm going to create something for a client, for myself, a product, a blog post, a social post, a podcast setup, even a PowerPoint for a webinar or a live class, I'm going to tell you something amazing. I'm going to explain it to you, and then I'm going to get you to come back for more.
All right. Wow. I did not know that Russell Brunson's hook story offer was something he stole from Nancy Drew. That's pretty
pretty much. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So I would love to dive into how you think about that stuff, right? So you're writing it into everything. What makes a good hook point, right? Like how do you know when you have a good hook point?
The shorter, the better. And the simpler, the better. So I'll give you the example of my first company name. When I first started my computer repair business, I would go into people's homes and I would fix their computers or teach them how to use email, Word, etc. A lot of older people I worked with. And I had so many names. I had E3 Solutions. I was Elizabeth Hammond. This is my maiden name. I had all these different names. I was EH Productions, EH Designs. I could not pick a name. I worked with a branding person. I actually hired another branding person because I literally could not see the forest for my trees, right? And she said to me, I want you to do this exercise, which I do in my branding sessions now. It's amazing. So I did the exercise, and what came out of it was Jack's Computer Chick. That was it. That was the name. And it was location, What do you do? Who are you? And it was all three of those things in 3 words, done. And I thought, that sounds too good to be true that it would be right. And I had that name for 10 years before I sold the company. And another name that was, I had a decluttering, business that I was working with, and she was struggling with her name. And she started working with a branding person that wasn't me. So she hired someone else. And I'm like, oh, I need to figure this out for her. Like, I need to, I need to figure this out. So she gets rebranded by this other company, and she shows it to me, and I'm like, this is amazing. It was called the Declutter Company. Like it's the simplest thing is the most effective. So whether it has your location, because mine with Jack's Computer Chick, I was going to people's homes. I couldn't be national, right? I wasn't going to do things online. It was literally going to people's homes. So it had to be location based. So I really find that whatever the hook is you're trying to create, whether it's a tagline, whether it's like mine, creating 1 year of marketing content in 5 days, I'm literally telling you what I do, and you don't need to know anything else. If you want to know something else, that's kind of your own curiosity, and that's good for me. But I'm trying to give you as much information as possible so that you don't have to think anymore about it. You either say, yes, I want it, or no, that's not for me. And if you do want it, that means you're curious and you need to know more information, and then we can have a conversation.
And now you're about to get sold. That's
Coffee is for closers, Pablo.
Is there, I'm the worst. I'm the worst salesperson ever, right? So is there, as you were saying all that stuff, I'm like, man, I'm thinking of like storytelling kind of frameworks, right? And like one of the storytelling frameworks that I've learned is like character, context, conflict, big idea, resolution. And in the hook that you're describing, it's kind of character, context, conflict, right? Like it's character, context, thing that you're solving for, no?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I mean. It has to be encompassing of everything you're doing with the least amount of words possible. And I think that's where, people will sit down to write a blog post, and they'll feel overwhelmed because they'll say, well, I can't write 12 blog posts in a day, because I tell them they can, and I do that as part of my business. And they're like, I can't do that. It's too much, right? And what they're envisioning is writing 12 books.
Yeah.
And they're envisioning this story content, like this storyline that you're talking about, how you add all those things in. But what I tell them is, can you write 9 sentences? If you can write 9 sentences, you can write a blog post, and you can fit all of what you just said, the character, the conflict, the resolution, all of that in 9 sentences, 3 sentences each paragraph, 3 paragraphs. You can do that in 9 sentences. Once you get started, 9 sentences seems like, oh, I can do that. Sure, no problem. I'll try and do it right now. Then they just get started. And then it comes to maybe 15 sentences or 20 sentences, and they have a fully well-rounded, well-written blog post or article. But to get them started, it's like you can fit all of what you just said in 9 sentences. So if you can at least get there, then you can do a blog post, and then it might take you 30 minutes or so to write a blog post. And now there's more, you could do 12 in a day. That's not that much time.
So the number one thing going through my head right now is like, Roanne takes all of these podcasts that we do, and she figures out, all right, what are the things that are teachable, and makes like YouTube kind of playlists out of it. And I feel bad for her because there's so much stuff to teach here that is so freaking practical. This is genius. You said that there's a branding exercise that you thought was particularly genius that you do. Is there any way that you can share kind of like how to do that branding exercise?
I will give you the beginning part of it.
Of course,
and if you would like it interpreted, then you can come to me and I will interpret it for you.
Cool. Sounds good.
So the first part of it is you actually you have a page, a blank page, and then you do this by hand. You don't do this online. So don't do it on your phone. Don't do it on like a notepad. You have to do it physically writing, right? So you have a blank piece of paper. You draw a line down the middle. You put business on one side and you put me on the other side. And then you sit and you have a 5-minute timer, and you write down every adjective or phrase or adverb even that describes your business, or that people have said describes your business, or that you think describes your business, or where you would like your business to be, good, bad, and ugly, right? Then you do the exact same thing for the other side, for the me category. Things people have told you about yourself, things you believe about yourself, things that you wish you were like, things that you think you are, but maybe are kind of more on the vice category. And you literally write down all of those things. And that's the first part of it.
Awesome. That's cool. All right, cool. The community wants to know. Deb is asking, what was that formula you said that encompasses that 9 sentences? What are the 9 sentences that you have to write for a blog post?
3 to open, 3 to explain, and 3 to close.
3 to open, 3 to explain, 3 to close. And do you build, I said that whole like character, conflict, context, big idea, resolution. Do you think of that way as well? Is the first sentence, is the first open that, is the middle one that, is the other one that?
Typically the first sentence is a question. Have you ever, are you thinking, do you want, blah, 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 blah. Like it's your hook question. And then you can use the intro paragraph to explain that question or answer that question, or even maybe ask 2 more questions to kind of really get the person thinking. Then the second paragraph would be to explain why you're asking the question in the first place, or how you might solve that problem in a way, if it's kind of more of a 3-part solvable piece.
Yeah. That seems like big idea section, right?
And then the final piece would be, this is what I do. This doesn't have to be this hard. You're not alone, and come talk to me, kind of thing. Typically, I don't go through the list that you go through, only because I find that people already have that up here. They just are not accessing it. And what I typically start with is the 3 paragraphs, the 3 sentences. I typically start with the title first, which is why I even go back to the FAQs again. So I'll go to the FAQs, and it says, like for some of my doctor clients, it'll say, do you take insurance? Or what is DPC, right? Direct primary care. So these are in their FAQs, but they have them in these little tiny, like mini paragraphs, right? To just give you the gist. They could take that and talk about it for a whole 9 sentences. So if they already have what is DPC and they have a sentence or 2 about it, they just have to expand on it. So I really start with the title first, then I write the 3 paragraphs, but you can also use that character, et cetera. You can use all that as well.
Okay, amazing. We are right now at the 10-minute warning. In 10 minutes, we are going to go into relationship-driven growth strategy sessions. That's when we just go into the open Q&A. Elizabeth, as you know, you are invited, and I would love to have you there as the wise sage that you are. So stick around after the show. I'm just going to go ahead and be selfish now. And I realize that I have a genius in front of me, right? Like I'm super impressed. Like you have an open invitation whenever you want on the show to come discuss any other genius that you have in your mind. But what I would like, yeah, that's how you're like, that's what I came here for. You will never stand me up again. Fact. I just want to be selfish. And man, I think that we're headed into a recession. Everybody's worried about their business. And, I feel like you are super smart and a great strategist. What are people getting wrong right now? What should businesses be thinking about? What are you hearing on the streets? Like, give me some, like, what's your best advice? I'm just going to open it up to that.
I want to ask the audience. Do I have a phone a friend? No, I was kidding. Ask the audience. Definitely put in the chat if you are doing at least 1 marketing task a day right now, currently, let's say in July, right? So are you doing 1 marketing task a day right now?
Give us context. What constitutes as a marketing task?
Could be sending an email out, mass email, could be putting up a social post, could be applying to be on a podcast, all that kind of stuff. Could be going to a networking event.
So if you're putting 1 social media post a day, that counts?
That would be count. Yeah, that would count. Now, you don't want to just be putting up 1 social media post a day. It needs to be diversified, it needs to be varied, right? So most people are saying yes, at least 1 per day. You have what Daniel Hannan MP called caulked your holes and cleared your rigging. Like this is nautical terms, right? We need to make sure that we're prepped now for the storm that's coming. And so as long as you have consistent marketing efforts in place daily, like literally daily, and some of this stuff can be done ahead of time, right? When I say daily, I sit down at the beginning of the year, or sometimes any time in the year, really, and I will write 12 months of blog posts. I will set up, 6 months of podcast and do them, because I do my own podcast as well. I will do all of my, social media posts in 1 day. So I'll spend like a week and I'll, just knock out a bunch of this stuff. And I consider that my daily stuff because it's going out for me, right? Even though I'm doing other things as well, I might only have to do 3 things a week instead of 7 because some of that's already done for me. So definitely, like, it's just about consistency. So as long as you're being consistent, you'll be fine. That is what's gotten me through 15 years and 1 recession. I'm about to go into the next one. But if you're not doing anything right now, this is when you definitely need to implement doing something like creating 365 posts in a day, creating 12 months of blog posts in a day, creating 1 year of email marketing content in a day. Because if you can get that off your plate now, but then know you're still going to be consistent in the future, it takes 3 to 6 months for that consistency to what I call quote work. So, and that's where you see the actual like ROI from it. So definitely, if you're not doing something consistent now, do it, start now. And if you are being consistent right now, think of when recession does come. Are you going to be hustling? Are you going to be cold calling? Are you going to be like, what is your kind of like go-to famine response? Right. And if that's not going to allow you to continue to be consistent, you need to devise a way to create your posts ahead of time, to create your blogs ahead of time, etc. So just keep that in mind, that if consistency is going to be knocked off by things happening in the world, try to be proactive now and get it done ahead of time.
I just chatted Royanne that we need to cut that out and give it to you as a gift because the world needs to hear that message, right? Like what I'm hearing from you is I'm going to try to distill it, right? You said it perfectly. Bullet points are you need to do at least 1 marketing action a day. You need to find multiple channels to diversify yourself across. You also said that what's important about that is the idea that it takes about 6 months for that flywheel to start turning and for it to start paying off. So if you think that we're headed into hard times, then you need to start doing it right now because times are getting tougher. And then you said another very intelligent thing, which is you said it without saying it, but like you can front load all that work now to make you more active later, right? Like applying the frameworks of what we call in content production as stacking, right? Like use one day to write 12 blogs. You know, I have like 3 months worth of, weekly blogs. Use one day to do 8 podcast interviews. You know, I have 8 weeks of interviews. Use one day to, you're right, like this idea of like stacking things so that then you can now have something that's consistent and isn't overwhelming you, allows you to have a baseline that's happening every single day that will then in the future allow you to play offense on other things as opposed to just trying to get the things out. I think it's really just impeccable advice and perfect timing for it. That's really cool. Okay, I feel like I just spoke unnecessary. That was like that. I call that the section of the show where I mansplain a genius in front of me. Anything else, Elizabeth? What else? What else haven't I? We got 4 minutes left. All right, let's just get into it. Where do we go to get the thing that you want us to get? Because we are all in on how smart you are, and I want you more in my life. I want you in my inbox. I want you in my social media feed. How do we get more, Elizabeth?
You can go to getabsolutemarketing.com and there's a free tab. And that's where the Pro Toolkit is. I do update it regularly. I actually just updated it the other day. We had a social media software we were using that was it was going bad. So I added a different one, which we have vetted and tested, and it's amazing. So that one's in there now. Almost everything has discounts. And if you are not aware of the privacy policy information about the government requiring privacy policies to be on websites right now, you definitely need one on your site. If you don't have one, if you do have one and it was not written by a lawyer, needs to be. So there's a system on the Pro Toolkit that I use that is like $89 a year, and they will update your privacy policy for you automatically with some code. So you fill out a questionnaire, put some code on your website, and some lawyers in South Florida will update your privacy policy when your state law changes and when federal law changes and even international law changes. So yeah, it's pretty great resource, and it is mandated by law right now. I'm required as a designer to tell you that. And so as long as you have it on your site, you won't be sued. It doesn't offer 100% protection because each business is different, but it does offer you some protection, at least, to kind of like an insurance policy. And if you are sued for not having one, let's just say you just don't even have one, you can be sued for that. It's $2,500 per person, as long as you haven't had one and your site's been in existence, like per visitor. So it can add up to a lot. So I try to give people a little heads up on that one. So for $89 a year, it's a pretty good deal. And it is in the Pro Tool kit.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think I need to cancel relationship driven growth strategies. Let's just go get the Pro Toolkit, sign up for that thing, pay $89 a year. I never knew that South Florida had lawyers. That's new to me. Just kidding.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
Last question. What, like, how does someone grow up to be like you, man? Like, I haven't been, like, spoiler alert, I fall in love with everybody I meet, but I've never been like, this has been the most like impressive kind of just like barrage of valuable information and incredible resources that I've had. Like, what's your secret to success? I don't know, man. Like,
I was homeschooled, so nobody can change that if you weren't. But I really have this desire and kind of like nature to find the like clear away all the junk, right? So that's why I created the Power Days, because when I was doing the website design, like normally, like everybody else does web design, it was like 3 to 6 months or even a month of web design. I'm trying to get the client to give you things. It was just this mess. And I was constantly stressed out. The clients were stressed out. And I was like, how do I just clear away all the junk? And what if I could just get a client in a room with me for one entire day for 8 hours? Could I get out of them what I need out of them? And I know I can build a site in a day. I've done it a million times for myself, right? I've just sat down and built a site, and because I knew all the info, I could get the info from myself, right? And so what if I just had the person there and I did that? So I do that with everything. And when I changed my business like 5 years ago and I did that, it changed everything else for me. And that's actually when into 2020 is when I went into like personal minimalism. And then I started applying that to marketing, because it's just about clear away all the junk and what's left over. The truth is left over. And so that's kind of how I operate.
strong argument for homeschooling. Just throwing it out there, man. Elizabeth, this has been, I don't know if I've told you how impressed I am by you, but this has been an unbelievable pleasure. I'm really not exaggerating when I tell you that this is right now in my top podcast to listen to on my own playlist of just like go back, re-listen multiple times. The things that you broke down are incredibly valuable, not heard anywhere else that I have heard, and super, super doable and practical. And more than anything, I'm glad that I'm a kindred spirit with you in at least one way. I would like to be more like you in all these other ways, but like it feels really awesome to meet somebody that really thinks about relationships as a strategy. It's really, really cool to kind of like connect with you on that level. Thank you for being on the show.
This has been one of my favorite shows as well. So thank you so much.